All right, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, July 30th, 2015. And it's been another busy week for the Nefarium, at least the Eastern and Russian components of it. I have a couple of very interesting stories. These slipped right beneath the radar of the Western lamestream media. Both of the sources are in fact from China and Russia. RT, of course, which everyone understands is a propaganda organ of the Russian government, and then the website Global Research, which is also another pro-Russian, pro-Chinese website. So bear that in mind when you hear these two stories. But I suspect that my own high-octane speculation as to what I think might be going on here is going to be challenged by some of you. A lot of you are going to have different perspectives on what is going on here. But here we go. This is from the RT website. This is an article titled U.S. National Endowment for Democracy, labeled Undesirable Group Under New Law. This is a story by Jason Reed at Reuters, which was picked up by RT. And let me read three paragraphs from this article. They're very, very important to the story. According to the release published by the Prosecutor General's Office website, the deputy head of the agency, Vladimir Malinovsky, on Tuesday signed the decision to recognize as undesirable on the territory of the Russian Federation all activities of the foreign non-government organization, the National Endowment for Democracy. On the same day, this decision was forwarded to the Justice Ministry that must now include the National Endowment for Democracy in the list of undesirable foreign organizations. Prosecutors added in their report that the decision was based on the analysis of the endowment's recent work. This analysis showed that it controlled some Russian commercial and non-commercial organizations and used them in campaigns aimed at recognizing the results of Russian polls as illegitimate, influencing the authorities' decisions through political actions and discrediting of the Russian military forces. The release adds that in 2013 and 2014, the National Endowment for Democracy rendered $5.2 million in financial aid to its Russian partners, and according to the RBC, the endowment itself has earlier reported that in 2014 alone, it satisfied 95 Russian applications for aid amounting to $8.4 million. Then a little further on in this article, it states this, quote, the bill on undesirable foreign organizations was signed into law by President Vladimir Putin in late May. The new law allows the Prosecutor General's Office and the Foreign Ministry to create a proscribed list of undesirable foreign organizations, making the activities of such groups in Russia illegal. The main criterion for putting a foreign or international NGO on the list is a, quote, threat to the constitutional order and defense capability or to the security of the Russian state, unquote. All right. Now, clearly, this is directed at the NGO activity, using NGOs as cutouts for the financing and planning and staging of covert operations around the world. And certainly, we've seen the effect of that policy most recently in the Ukraine. So, in other words, as I warned people over and over again, when you start playing the covert operations game, it's going to come back to bite you in your own backyard. Now, we'll get to that in a minute, but I suspect very strongly that these are measures being taken by the Putin government in Russia to head off at the pass any potential covert activity inside the Russian Federation itself, designed to bring about quote unquote regime change. So Russia's clamping down. Now, this is followed up at almost the same time by a similar measure in China. And this is from the Global Research website in an article by Eric Dretzer. And this article is titled China's NGO Law Countering Western Soft Power and Subversion. And this is quite a long article. I just want to read a very few paragraphs in it for you so that you can kind of see what China's take on this is. And beginning now under the section heading Soft Power and the Destabilization of China, the article states this, quote, Human Rights Watch and the NGO complex at large has condemned China's overseas NGO management law because they rightly believe that it will severely hamper their efforts to act independently of Beijing. However, contrary to the irreproachable expression of innocence that such organizations masquerade behind, the reality is that they act as a de facto arm of Western intelligence agencies and governments. And that, in fact, I think is a fair assessment. And they have played a central role in the destabilization of China in recent years. Now, that's one I want you to pay attention to, because this is a claim being made by China. And the claim is that there is little media focus on these destabilization activities inside of China. And I think this is also true, because the article goes on to state this, quote, what the corporate media in the West failed to mention were the deeply rooted connections between the Occupy Central movement and the key organs of U.S. soft power. The oft-touted leader of Occupy Central was a pro-Western academic by the name of Benny Tai, a law professor at the University of Hong Kong. Though he presented himself as the leader of a grassroots mass movement, Mr. Tai has for years been partnered with the National Endowment, the National Democratic Institute, a nominal NGO, which is actually directly funded by the U.S. State Department via the National Endowment for Democracy. And in fact, the National Democratic Institute has been one of the leading advocates and financial backers, presumably, of the Center for Comparative and Public Law at the University of Hong Kong, a program which Benny Tai has been intimately connected, including as a board member since 2006, unquote. Let me stop there, because that connection of a law professor and his involvement in a Center for Comparative Law is a huge clue, because as you recall in the most recent book that I wrote, The Third Way, the Nazi International, the European Union, and Corporate Fascism, the key to bringing about these huge transnational federations like the European Union is precisely through the amalgamation and coordination of copyright and patent law. This is the way they're bringing in these huge federated regions, and they're trying here to point out that this same activity was being extended even into China and to Chinese law. So watch the field of law, because it's crucial to the whole game plan of Mr. Global. Now, further in this article, it points out that there has been Muslim terrorist activity in the western Chinese province of Xinjiang, all right, which has a very heavy Muslim population. And the article goes on to point out that this is being coordinated to a certain extent by NGOs and by, to some extent, Turkey of all countries. Now, at the very end of this global research article, there are two mentions of the province of Xinjiang and its Muslim population, and the conclusions that the Chinese government is coming to. Quote, so Uyghur terrorists, these are the Muslim terrorists in Xinjiang province, with forged documents provided by sources inside Turkey, are implicated as being a part of the same terror networks that carried out a series of deadly attacks on Chinese citizens and police. No wonder China is not exactly bending over backwards to dry Erdogan's and the Turkish government's crocodile tears. And yet, despite the terror war, the US-funded Uyghur NGOs continue to portray China as responsible for the terrorism. In other words, the claim is being asserted here that American NGOs are quietly sponsoring this terrorist activity amongst the Muslim population in Xinjiang province in western China, and that Turkey is kind of involved as the cutout. That's what's being stated here. Now, the final paragraph in this article, I think, is the real giveaway as to what might be happening in Russia and China, and this final paragraph leads me to my high-octane speculation of the day. It says, quote, "The destabilization of China takes many forms. From a manufactured protest movement in Hong Kong, sponsored by NGOs connected to the US government, to a fabricated propaganda war peddled by other NGOs also sponsored by the US government, to a terror war being fomented by a NATO member, meaning Turkey, China is a nation under assault by soft and hard power. That Beijing is finally taking steps to curb the pernicious influence of such NGOs and the forces they represent is not only a positive step, it's an absolutely necessary one. The national security and national sovereignty of the People's Republic of China requires nothing less," unquote. Now, I've said for many years, as we've been watching all of this NGO-sponsored destabilization activity up to and including the coup d'etat against the government in Kiev that installed the current regime in the Ukraine, that covert operations are a game that two people can play. Thus far, it's been the United States playing the game aggressively and offensively around the world to destabilize regimes and governments that it does not like, and basically to install puppet governments. Now, obviously, Russia and China have reacted to this by naming the specific NGOs that they believe are responsible for some of these activities and instituting legislation against the furtherance of these things on their territory. So they're taking defensive measures. Now, I'm going to suggest two things right off the bat here, and this is my high octane speculation. First of all, I think that this might be the emergence of a coordinated policy amongst the BRICS bloc in its entirety. In other words, not only can we expect to see more of the same from Russia and China, but I believe we can expect to see more of this from India and most importantly from Brazil, all right? Because Brazil and the Latin American nations have been under the thumb of the United States for quite some time. And we saw the CIA sponsored coup d'etat against the government of Salvador Allende, which installed the government of Pinochet in Chile. So, in other words, I think you're going to see similar legislation being enacted by all the BRICS nations to protect themselves from covert operations and regime change and destabilization measures on their territory. I do not expect that this is the end of the matter from Russia and China, because as we increasingly resort to such measures to bring about destabilization and regime change, I fully expect that eventually, and this is kind of another prediction, I fully expect that eventually we're going to see those countries begin to sponsor similar types of non-government organizations and covert activities in the backyard of the Western powers, and particularly the United States. Now, I think also that these types of defensive measures are going to spread not only from Russia and China to the rest of the BRICS bloc, but that we're going to see this spread to Western Europe. So watch France, watch Italy, watch Spain, watch Germany as they begin to sponsor similar legislation. So in other words, it's more pushback against American unipolarism. So that's it for my high-octane speculation of the day, an important development in Russia and China. I'll see you all on the flip side, and God bless everybody.